nursing a flute of champagne, feeling entirely like I'd wandered onto the set of a movie I wasn't cast in. And honestly, I hadn't been. This annual charity gala hosted by the Seattle Chamber of Commerce was an exclusive playground for the city's corporate elite and old money dynasties. My family name, Wright, carried a little weight in local contractor circles. My dad, Thomas Wright, ran a respectable mid-sized construction materials firm. But in a room full of genuine billionaires, we didn't even qualify for the kids' table. I was only here because my older brother, Liam, had a last-minute emergency, and my dad couldn't bear to let an invitation this expensive go to waste. So, he shipped off his youngest, least business-minded son to fill the seat. "Ethan, mingle a little. Expand your network," my dad had told me, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder before I left the house. "And keep your head down. We can't afford to offend a single person in that room." I had been sitting on the couch, flipping through a hardcover book on architectural photography. I looked up and gave him a mild smile. "Dad, are you sure my networking is going to do anything? I have a feeling absolutely no one there wants to network with us." He choked on his words for a second before waving me off. "Just showing your face is better than nothing." So here I was. Wearing the crispest navy blue suit I owned, I stood in the corner of the ballroom like a quiet observer. I wasn't built for small talk, and I hated the fake, polite laughter that accompanied corporate schmoozing. I found a spot near a massive marble pillar, slowly sipping my champagne and people-watching. The ballroom was obnoxiously opulent. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant, fractured light over the crowd. The women were in a silent war of haute couture and blinding diamonds, while the men in tailored tuxedos traded pleasantries that were likely coded negotiations for corporate mergers. Bored out of my mind, I pulled out my phone and shot a text to Noah, my best friend and old college roommate. "Ethan, my dad exiled me to this charity gala. I am dying of boredom." He replied almost instantly. "Noah, bro, what is an architect doing at a billionaire gala?" "Ethan, Liam couldn't make it. I'm the understudy." "Noah, see any heiresses? Bump into one, spill a drink, marry into billions, and secure the bag for life. Think about it. I'm getting excited just picturing it." I couldn't help but laugh, my thumbs flying over the screen. "Ethan, you watch too many movies. I'm a nobody here. A billionaire heiress wouldn't even look in my direction." "Noah, I don't know, man. You look like you stepped out of a GQ magazine. How many girls in our department were obsessed with you?" "Ethan, that was years ago. Anyway, gotta go. Looks like something's happening." I shoved my phone back into my pocket and casually glanced toward the center of the ballroom. And then I froze. At the main entrance, a group of people had just walked in, swarming around a single figure. Leading the pack was a young woman in a sharply tailored, knee-length black cocktail dress that showcased her long, elegant legs. Her dark hair was swept up into a sleek, low knot, drawing attention to the graceful curve of her neck and her sharp collarbones. A single minimalist diamond pendant rested against her skin. Not overly massive, but under the chandeliers, it demanded absolute attention. She was gorgeous. But it wasn't a soft, warm girl-next-door kind of beauty. It was a sharp, aggressive, predatory kind of stunning. Her brows arched naturally. Her nose was a perfect straight line, and her lips were pressed into a thin, unbothered line. She looked like a freshly unsheathed sword, radiating an icy, untouchable aura. She stared straight ahead, not bothering to make eye contact with anyone, yet the crowd naturally parted for her, stepping aside under the sheer weight of her presence. Without realizing it, I stood up a little straighter. I recognized her. Honestly, anyone who lived in Seattle recognized her. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, and the sole heir to the Sterling family's third generation. Sterling Enterprises was a true titan of the Pacific Northwest, with a portfolio spanning commercial real estate, tech, finance, and healthcare, boasting assets in the hundreds of billions. 5 years ago, her father, Richard Sterling, had handed the keys to the empire over to his 22-year-old daughter and promptly left to travel the globe with his wife. Rumor had it, they were currently watching penguins in Antarctica. Everyone had waited for the young heiress to fail. Instead, she had brutally purged the board of its old, corrupt guard, secured several massive city-defining contracts, and increased the company's revenue by 40% in under 3 years. Forbes had recently dubbed her the Iron Rose of the Pacific Northwest. and this woman was currently walking toward the center of the room, every step radiating absolute, unshakable confidence. My eyes tracked her movements, entirely against my own will. And then, something impossible happened. As Victoria passed near my corner of the ballroom, she suddenly turned her head and looked directly at me. Just one glance. Her eyes were a deep, dark brown, like autumn amber, cool and completely transparent. Her gaze sliced right through the crowd, landed squarely on me, and then she stopped. It was maybe for a fraction of a second, so brief I almost convinced myself I had hallucinated it. But in that tiny moment, I distinctly saw something flicker in those icy eyes. It was like a small pebble being dropped into a perfectly still lake, creating a ripple that was almost invisible. Then she looked away, her pace never breaking, acting as if nothing had happened. My heart skipped 3 completely unwarranted beats. I instinctively touched my face, thinking, do I have something on my cheek? I mentally reviewed my morning routine. I had definitely washed my face. I hadn't eaten anything messy. I looked down at my clothes, navy suit, white dress shirt, charcoal tie, completely standard. Nothing out of the ordinary. I must have imagined it, I told myself, taking a long sip of champagne to drown the bizarre flutter in my chest. What I had no way of knowing at the time was that a dozen steps later, Victoria tilted her head slightly and whispered to her executive assistant, Chloe. That man standing in the corner? Who is he? Chloe blinked, looking back over her shoulder in the direction Victoria had been staring. She squinted, uncertain. Miss Sterling, do you mean the young man in the navy suit? Victoria didn't answer verbally. She just gave a micro nod, lifting her chin a fraction of an inch. Having worked for Victoria for 3 years, Chloe knew exactly what that gesture meant. Confirm it, and run a background check. I'll look into him immediately, Chloe said. Victoria nodded, her expression slipping back into total neutrality as she stepped into the VIP section of the ballroom to exchange pleasantries with the city's billionaires. Her smile was flawless, polite, distant, and completely impenetrable. But if anyone had been paying close attention over the next hour, they would have noticed her amber eyes drifting back to a specific, dimly lit corner of the room, over and over again. And in that corner, I was leaning against the wall, mindlessly scrolling through Instagram, occasionally looking up at the crowd. By the time the gala shifted into the charity auction phase, I was checking my watch, calculating if I could sneak out in 30 minutes without anyone noticing. I was currently debating whether to go home and read the deluxe omnibus edition of Saga I just bought, or boot up my PlayStation, when a cool, distinctly feminine voice broke through my thoughts. Mr. Wright. I snapped my head up. Victoria Sterling was standing right in front of me. Up close, she was even more breathtaking. Her skin was almost translucent, her features impossibly delicate yet sharp. She was tall, maybe 5'7", and in her heels, the top of her head came up to my nose. Hello, I said, fumbling to stand up straight, nearly sloshing my champagne over the rim of my glass. Ms. Sterling, you know who I am? I just found out, Victoria said. Her tone was flat, like she was reading a quarterly earnings report. Ethan Wright, 25 years old, graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in architecture, currently employed at a mid-sized design firm, the youngest son of Thomas Wright. You have an older brother and an older sister, none of whom are involved in the daily management of your father's business. I just stared at her. I couldn't decide what was more shocking, the fact that she had my entire biography memorized, or the fact that the CEO of Sterling Enterprises had ordered a background check on me in the middle of a gala. Ms. Sterling, is there something you need from me? I asked cautiously. Victoria looked at me. It was a scrutinizing look, but there was something else layered underneath it. Her gaze drifted slowly over my face, like she was verifying a memory, before finally settling on my eyes. You have beautiful eyes, she said out of nowhere. My brain completely short-circuited. I had lived on this earth for 25 years. I had been called nice, sweet, handsome, and easygoing. But being bluntly told I had beautiful eyes by a billionaire CEO I just met was an entirely new experience. Thank you, I managed to say, feeling like I was trapped in a very vivid fever dream. Victoria didn't say another word. She just gave me a curt nod, turned around, and walked away. Her pace was graceful and unhurried, the hem of her black dress swaying slightly like liquid midnight. I stood frozen, watching her back until she disappeared into the sea of tuxedos and gowns. Without realizing it, I brought my glass to my lips, only to find it completely empty. I stared at the empty glass, then at the spot where she had vanished, my mind spinning. What the hell was that? I muttered to myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Noah. Noah? So? Gala over yet? Did you find a sugar mama? I am starving. Buy me dinner. I stared at the text for several seconds, hesitating, before typing out a reply. Ethan. Noah. If a top-tier billionaire female CEO randomly walks up to you and says you have beautiful eyes, what does that mean? Noah. Victoria Sterling complimented you? Noah, bro, she is literally the only billionaire female CEO in Seattle. You saying I have a friend would have been a better disguise. Spill it. What happened? I sighed and typed out a quick summary of the interaction. The three dots typing bubble appeared and disappeared for a full minute before Noah sent a wall of exclamation points. Noah, Ethan, right. She wants you. You just hit the jackpot. Ethan, stop. She was probably just making small talk. Noah, small talk? That is Victoria Sterling. She makes $10 million every time she blinks. Well, I don't know the exact math, but it's a lot of money. You think she has time to walk up to a random dude and say, you have beautiful eyes just for fun? Want to bet? If I'm wrong, I'll eat my shoe. I didn't reply. I shoved my phone back into my pocket, grabbed another glass of champagne from a passing waiter, and took a long gulp, trying to drown out the sudden, bizarre racing of my heart. It's impossible, I told myself. Someone like Victoria Sterling would never look twice at a guy like me. Maybe my eyes just reminded her of someone she knew. Yeah, that was it. A momentary lapse of nostalgia. Having successfully reasoned with myself, I slipped out the back doors as the auction wrapped up and ordered an Uber home. What I couldn't have known was that as I walked out of the hotel lobby, Victoria was standing by the second-floor mezzanine railing, watching my retreating figure until the revolving doors completely obscured me from view. Chloe, she said softly. Yes, Miss Sterling, her assistant replied instantly. How many girlfriends has he had? Chloe, ever the professional, had already prepared the brief. She pulled up the notes on her iPad. According to what we could pull, Ethan Wright had one brief relationship in college. It lasted about 3 months. The girl was a classmate in the architecture department. They broke up amicably after graduation. He hasn't dated anyone since. His social circle is very clean, mostly commutes between his apartment, his design firm, and the gym, with occasional dinners with close friends. No negative press, no scandals, no bad habits. The corners of Victoria's mouth tipped upward. It was a minuscule shift, one that anyone else would have missed, but Chloe had worked for her long enough to recognize it. Perfect, Victoria murmured. The word was spoken softly, but Chloe could hear a distinct undercurrent of deep, absolute satisfaction. Internally, Chloe lit a metaphorical candle for the unsuspecting Mr. Wright. In all her years working here, she had never seen her boss show even a sliver of interest in a man. Whether this was a blessing or a curse for the young architect remained to be seen. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice came through the speaker with a weird, suppressed excitement, like a guy who had just won the lottery but was trying to act cool at the gas station counter. Ethan, my boy, do you have plans for Saturday night? I thought about it. No. Why? Fantastic. I have a dinner on Saturday, and I need you to come with me. What kind of dinner? Just a regular business dinner, my dad said, his tone entirely unconvincing. Dress sharp. Comb your hair. Don't show up in a hoodie and sneakers like you usually do. I frowned. This was highly out of character. He knew I had zero interest in the family business, and he never forced me to attend contractor dinners. Why the sudden shift? Dad, who exactly is going to be at this dinner? I pressed. Just a few friends were grabbing a bite. You'll see when you get there. He hung up before I could ask another question. I stared at the black screen of my phone, a nagging sense of suspicion settling into my gut. Saturday evening arrived. Following orders, I spent a few extra minutes styling my hair and threw on a tailored light gray suit with a slim tie. I arrived exactly on time at the restaurant he had texted me. It was a ridiculously high-end, private dining spot in downtown Seattle. The kind of place where you had to know a guy who knew a guy just to get a reservation 3 months in advance. A hostess in a sleek black dress led me down a quiet, dimly lit hallway and pushed open the heavy oak doors to a private room. I stepped inside and froze. My dad was sitting near the window. Next to him was an elegant, older man in a bespoke navy suit. His hair was peppered with silver, but he had a sharp, handsome face and a warm, easygoing smile. And sitting next to the older man was Victoria Sterling. My feet stopped moving. She was dressed in a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater and wide-leg gray trousers. She looked infinitely softer than she had at the gala. Her dark hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, framing her face and taking the sharp edge off her usual icy demeanor. But that innate, untouchable elegance was still there. She looked like a lone lotus blooming on a glacier, breathtaking but out of reach. "Ethan, you made it." My dad practically jumped out of his chair, waving me over. Come, let me introduce you. This is Richard Sterling of Sterling Enterprises and his." "I know," I said, recovering my composure. I walked over and gave Richard a polite nod. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Sterling." Richard looked me up and down, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was the distinct, assessing look of a father-in-law evaluating a potential groom, but surprisingly warm. "Ethan, right?" Sit, make yourself comfortable," Richard said, patting the empty chair next to him. "Your dad tells me you're an architect?" "Yes, sir. I work at a local design firm," I answered honestly, pulling out the chair. It wasn't until I sat down that I realized my seat was directly across the table from Victoria. She lifted her eyes to look at me. Her gaze was as calm as deep water, completely unreadable. But for a split second, I swear I saw the corner of her lips twitch upward before instantly flattening out again. "Architecture is a noble pursuit," Richard said, his tone full of genuine appreciation. "It takes real creativity. When I was your age, I wanted to be an architect. But my family wouldn't hear of it, forced me right into business school." "If you still have an interest in it, Mr. Sterling, Seattle has a fantastic architecture scene," I said, keeping my tone respectful but not overly eager. "There are some incredible conceptual exhibits rotating through the city this time of year." "Is that right? Maybe you could take me to see one sometime?" Richard asked, instantly taking the bait. "I'd be happy to," I smiled. The waiters began bringing out the food. Course after course of incredibly exquisite dishes. As the plates hit the Lazy Susan, I felt my stomach drop. Grilled king salmon, braised short ribs, garlic roasted asparagus, and a creamy roasted tomato basil bisque. Every single dish was my absolute favorite. My heart did a weird, erratic stutter. I had never told my dad what my favorite high-end dishes were, but I had recently posted a picture of my homemade roasted tomato basil soup on my Instagram. A wildly specific, terrifying suspicion began to creep into my mind, but I ruthlessly shoved it down. "Impossible," I told myself. "It's just a massive coincidence." The atmosphere at the table was surprisingly relaxed. Richard was incredibly easy to talk to. We bounced from architecture to travel, from travel to food, and from food to photography. I realized we shared a ton of hobbies, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. Next to me, my dad was practically glowing, shoving asparagus into his mouth while watching us bond like it was the greatest show on earth. Victoria hardly spoke. She interjected maybe once or twice, but her timing was always flawless. I watched her eat. She moved elegantly, taking small, deliberate bites. Then I noticed something else. She hated cilantro. Every time the Lazy Susan brought a dish her way, she meticulously picked out the tiny green leaves and pushed them to the far edge of her plate. It was such a profoundly human quirk that it made the untouchable billionaire CEO suddenly feel very real. Halfway through the dinner, Richard set his fork down and cleared his throat. "Ethan, my boy, there's a little matter I'd like to discuss with you." I put my silverware down and sat up straight. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. What is it?" Richard glanced across the table at his daughter, then looked at my dad before flashing me a grin that was way too knowing. "Here's the situation. My Victoria here just turned 27. She spent her entire 20s building the company, and her personal life has taken a back seat. Her mother and I have been nagging her for years, introduced her to a dozen men, but she's never shown an ounce of interest." I nodded slowly, having absolutely no idea how I was supposed to respond to this. "However," Richard continued, his smile widening, "after she got home from the charity gala last week, she casually mentioned that she had met a very interesting young man. My heart skipped a beat. My eyes darted across the table to Victoria. She was taking a sip of water. Hearing her father's words, she paused for a microsecond before casually setting the glass down. But I noticed that her fingers were gripping the crystal a little tighter than necessary. "Mr. Sterling, are you saying?" I asked tentatively. "I'm saying it's you, kid," Richard laughed heartily. "Why else do you think I set up this dinner?" I sat there, completely paralyzed. I slowly turned my head to look at my dad. Thomas Wright immediately broke eye contact, suddenly fascinated by the grilled salmon on his plate. So, I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Sterling?" "I'm suggesting that you two young people try spending some time together," Richard said bluntly. "Matters of the heart need to be tested. If it works out, fantastic. If it doesn't, no harm done. You walk away as friends." I sat in stunned silence for a long time. I looked back across the table. Victoria finally looked up, meeting my eyes head-on. The icy, distant look she wore at the gala was entirely gone. In its place was a look of absolute, undeniable determination. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth and perfectly paced, "if you are opposed to this, you can just say no. I won't force you." It was a perfectly diplomatic statement, offering me a graceful exit to save everyone's pride. But for some inexplicable reason, my mind flashed back to the gala. To her standing in front of me, saying, "You have beautiful eyes." I thought about the tiny furrow in her brow as she picked the cilantro out of her food. And I looked at her eyes now, seemingly calm, but hiding the faintest, almost imperceptible trace of nervousness. "I'm not opposed," I heard myself say. The moment the words left my mouth, I shocked myself. Victoria's eyes lit up. It was a microscopic shift in brightness, one I only caught because I was staring directly into her eyes. But in that split second, the cold amber warmed up, radiating a heat that seemed to come from her very soul. "Let me get your number then," she said smoothly. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out her unlocked phone, and slid it across the table toward me, the new contact screen already glowing. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly punched my number into her phone, sending a test text so I'd have hers. Her contact popped up on my screen. No picture, just her first and last name. The whole exchange was so ruthlessly efficient, it felt like we had just signed a B2B vendor contract. But as the dinner wrapped up, I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire life had just violently shifted off its axis. After dinner, our families walked out of the restaurant together. Richard and my dad walked ahead, laughing like old war buddies. Victoria and I walked behind them, keeping a polite 2 feet of distance between us. The evening air was crisp. A cool breeze swept down the Seattle street, blowing a few strands of hair across Victoria's face. She reached up and tucked them behind her ear in a gesture that was frustratingly elegant. "Ethan," she suddenly said. "Yeah? Are you free on Saturday afternoon?" I thought about it. "Yeah, I am." "There's a new conceptual architecture exhibit opening at the Seattle Art Museum," Victoria said, her tone as casual as if she were scheduling a quarterly review. "I happen to have 2 VIP tickets. Would you like to go?" I couldn't help but laugh. I remembered what I had told her dad an hour ago about taking him to an architecture exhibit. She hadn't wasted a single second weaponizing that information. "I'd love to," I said. Victoria nodded once, not saying another word. But as we kept walking, I noticed her steps were just a little bit lighter than before. When I got home to my apartment, I collapsed onto my bed, staring blindly at the ceiling for a solid 10 minutes. Finally, I grabbed my phone and opened my texts with Noah. "Ethan, bro, I think I just got set up." "Noah, I feel like I'm being set up every time I play Call of Duty. My KD ratio is trash. Clearly, the matchmaking algorithm is rigged against me. Late-stage capitalism wins again. Ethan, I'm being serious." I typed out a play-by-play of the dinner. "Noah, Ethan Wright, are you actually stupid or just pretending? Did I not call this? She wants you." "Ethan, but why me? I'm literally just a normal guy." "Noah, listen to me, you absolute idiot. Think about the guys in Victoria Sterling's orbit. Hedge fund sociopaths, tech bro billionaires, old money trust fund babies. Noah, she's been surrounded by aggressive, arrogant sharks her whole life. You're a clean-cut, easygoing, handsome architect who cooks his own soup. Noah, you are a breath of fresh air. You are the ultimate golden retriever boyfriend." I stared at the screen, chewing on the inside of my cheek. Ethan, I mean, maybe you have a point? Noah, I always have a point. Also, you said her dad was super nice to you? Ethan, yeah, extremely friendly. No billionaire ego at all. Noah, yeah, exactly. Victoria obviously told her parents she wanted you and had her dad organize the hit. She's making aggressive, overt moves to lock you down. Remember me when you're flying private, bro. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the pillow next to me. I rolled onto my side, the image of Victoria's face at dinner flashing in my mind. If you are opposed to this, you can just say no. Her voice had been flat, but her eyes had been tense. Even the iron rose of the Pacific Northwest got nervous. A slow smile spread across my face in the dark. Suddenly, the idea of being targeted by a billionaire CEO didn't seem so terrifying after all. I arrived at the Seattle Art Museum 15 minutes early for our Saturday date. After waiting by the main entrance for about 10 minutes, a sleek black Maybach glided to a halt against the curb. The rear door opened, and Victoria stepped out. She was dressed entirely for a weekend off. A crisp, white button-down shirt layered under a tan trench coat, paired with clean white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, exposing her smooth forehead and sharp jawline. Without the armor of her corporate suits, she looked years younger. She looked like a gorgeous grad student I'd bump into at the campus library. But her eyes were still the same. Two perfectly cut jewels, beautiful, cool, and distant. "You're early," she said, walking up to me. "Not too early, just got here," I smiled. "Ready to head in?" Victoria nodded. The exhibit was titled Cities of Tomorrow, showcasing avant-garde concepts from rising international architects. Being deeply invested in the field, I fell right into my element, studying the scale models and occasionally snapping photos of the placards with my phone. Victoria walked beside me, but I noticed her eyes spent significantly less time on the exhibits and significantly more time on me. Every time I turned my head to analyze a blueprint, exposing the line of my jaw and my neck, every time I looked down at my phone, my eyelashes casting a shadow over my cheekbones. Every time I smiled, my eyes crinkling at the corners. Victoria tracked every single detail, cataloging them in her mind like a scientist studying a remarkably rare specimen. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a massive wall rendering. I turned to look at her. The designer integrated the vertical forest concept into retrofitting old brutalist structures. "It's brilliant." Victoria followed my finger, staring at the schematic for a few seconds. "It's aesthetically pleasing," she said smoothly. "But practically speaking, the maintenance overhead would be a nightmare. The irrigation systems alone for a vertical load that massive, combined with wind shearing on the upper stories, would require an astronomical capital expenditure just to keep it from rotting the concrete." I blinked at her and then burst out laughing. "You really are a CEO. Your first instinct is to audit the maintenance budget." "Occupational hazard," Victoria said dryly, but the corner of her mouth ticked upward. That tiny, barely there smile made my heart race again. I realized that when she smiled, even a small, restrained one, her entire aura softened. It was like sunlight cracking through a sheet of winter ice. It was magnetic. We spent 2 hours walking the exhibit. Afterward, I suggested we grab a coffee. "I know a great indie spot a couple blocks from here," I offered. She didn't object. The coffee shop was small, heavily leaning into an industrial vintage aesthetic. Black and white street photography hung on exposed brick walls, and a vintage record player in the corner was spinning soft jazz. I pulled out a chair for her, waiting until she sat down before taking the seat across from her. "Do you come here often?" Victoria asked, scanning the room. "Yeah, on weekends when I want to read. Their pour-overs are great, and the pastries are even better." I slid the menu toward her. "I highly recommend the tiramisu." Victoria glanced at the menu for exactly 1 second before closing it. "You order for me," she said. I looked at her, a little surprised, but didn't argue. I turned to the barista. "1 pour-over, 1 oat milk latte, a slice of tiramisu, and the cheesecake, please." The barista nodded and walked away. "Ethan," Victoria suddenly said, her tone dropping into something incredibly serious, "there is something I need to discuss with you." "What's up?" She went quiet for a moment, visibly organizing her thoughts. And then she dropped a bomb that effectively flatlined my brain. "Let's get married." I nearly knocked over the glass of water the barista had just set down. "What?" I choked out, absolutely certain I had misheard her. "Marriage?" Victoria repeated. Her voice was as calm as if she were commenting on the weather. Our families agree that we are a suitable match. Rather than wasting time dating, it is more efficient to simply get married. I opened my mouth, but it took my vocal cords a solid 5 seconds to start working again. Wait a minute. We've met exactly 3 times. 3 times, Victoria corrected. The gala, the dinner, today, 3. Okay, 3 times. I took a deep, panicked breath. But getting married after 3 meetings, isn't that insane? Do you see an issue with it? Victoria tilted her head slightly. Paired with her icy expression, the gesture was confusingly adorable. Do you have an objection to me? No, of course not. I waved my hands frantically. You're incredible. Really, it's just, marriage is a massive commitment. Don't we need time to get to know each other? I already know you, Victoria stated with absolute certainty. Ethan Wright, 25. 6'1", 65 pounds. Type O blood. Born October 17th, making you a Libra. You don't smoke, you drink occasionally. You had one girlfriend in college, which lasted 3 months. You haven't dated anyone since graduation. Your social record is immaculate, 0 vices. You are even-tempered, you cook your own meals, and the book currently on your nightstand is The Timeless Way of Building. I sat frozen in my chair. My soul left my body. How? How do you know what book I'm reading? Did you bug my apartment? My voice cracked. I had my people look into you, Victoria said, not looking even slightly apologetic. If we are going to marry, I obviously need to run proper due diligence. But we aren't at the marriage stage, I pleaded, my brain desperately trying to catch up to reality. Victoria stared at me. Slowly, her eyelashes lowered, casting a shadow over her amber eyes. She suddenly looked hurt. Do you not want to marry me? She asked. Her voice was suddenly much softer. My heart instantly caved in. It's not that I don't want to. It just feels way too fast, I stammered, trying to explain. This is a strategic alliance between our families, Victoria said, lifting her eyes to lock onto mine again. Sterling Enterprises and Wright Construction have multiple intersecting avenues for collaboration. A marriage secures mutual benefits for both sides. I blinked. A strategic alliance? Yes, Victoria nodded. My parents want me to settle down with someone from a clean background with solid morals. The Wright family isn't a conglomerate, but your father has an impeccable reputation for integrity. In the contracting world, you have 0 liabilities. From a corporate marriage perspective, you are the optimal candidate. I fell silent. Marriages of convenience weren't unheard of in the upper echelons of Seattle society. Tying 2 companies together with a wedding ring was an age-old business tactic. But my dad's company, compared to Sterling Enterprises, was like comparing a rowboat to an aircraft carrier. Why on earth would the Sterlings need to ally with the Wrights? But I struggled to find the words. Sterling Enterprises is a titan. Why would you need our help? We aren't even in the same stratosphere. Victoria's expression didn't waver. Size isn't the only metric of value. Your father has deep, generational roots in regional material sourcing. Sterling's new real estate developments require reliable, top-tier domestic suppliers to circumvent current shipping tariffs. Furthermore, your family's corporate culture aligns perfectly with ours. That is the true value of the alliance. Her logic was flawless. She laid it out like a perfectly structured thesis. It sounded completely reasonable. And yet, my gut screamed that something was very, very weird about all this. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the puzzle pieces didn't fit. I thought about it for a long, agonizing minute. And then, I made a decision that I knew I would either bless or curse for the rest of my life. Okay, I said. I saw Victoria's fingers unclench. What did you say? She asked. Her voice was steady, but I caught the microscopic tremor in her breath. I said okay, I repeated. Victoria stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds, and then she smiled. It wasn't the tiny, restrained twitch of her lips from the museum. It was a real, full, breathtaking smile. Her eyes curved into crescents, and her lips parted to reveal perfectly white teeth. It was like watching the first day of spring shatter a brutal winter. She was radiant. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it bruised. Then it's settled, Victoria said, immediately dropping the smile and pulling her icy CEO mask back on, though the lingering warmth in her eyes gave her away. Wednesday morning, 9:30 a.m. Meet me at City Hall. Bring your birth certificate and social security card. Okay, I nodded. And one more thing, she added. Keep this strictly confidential for now. We will announce it when the PR timing is optimal. Understood. We drank our coffee and ate the pastries. When the bill came, I grabbed it and paid. Victoria watched me hand my card to the waiter, but didn't argue. By the time we stepped out of the coffee shop, the sun was setting. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a warm orange glow over the damp Seattle pavement. I'll have my driver take you home, Victoria said. It's fine, I can just grab an Uber. Get in the car. Her tone brooked no argument before she quickly tacked on. It's getting cold. I looked at her, trying to suppress a grin. All right. Sitting in the plush leather of the Maybach's back seat, I watched the city blur past the tinted windows. My brain was absolute static. I was getting married. To a woman I had met exactly 3 times. To a billionaire CEO. I pulled out my phone and pulled up Noah's contact. Ethan, Noah. I'm getting married. Noah, bro, are you on drugs? To who? To Ethan, Victoria Sterling. Noah, Ethan, Victoria Sterling. Noah, did you drug here? Noah, An Alliance. Wright Construction and Sterling Enterprises? Bro, wake up! Your dad's company isn't fit to sweep the floors at our corporate headquarters. Noah, if she wanted a corporate alliance, she'd marry the heir to Amazon. What you're saying is like me and Elon Musk combining our net worths to conquer the globe. It's comedy. I stared at his texts, my brow furrowing. Yeah, it really didn't make any logical sense. But then I thought about it. Why would Victoria Sterling lie to me? With her money, power, and looks, she could have literally any man on the planet. Why would she go through the exhausting effort of fabricating a fake corporate merger just to trick a junior architect into marrying her? I couldn't figure it out, so I gave up trying. Whatever the real reason was, the outcome was locked in. I was about to be Victoria Sterling's husband. Suddenly, my painfully average, predictable life script had become a thriller, and I was weirdly excited for the next chapter. Wednesday morning, 8:05 a.m. I stood on the steps of City Hall, clutching a manila folder with my birth certificate and IDs, my heart hammering so violently I thought it was going to break my ribs. I hadn't slept a wink the night before. I had just laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the sheer absurdity of the last 2 weeks on an endless loop. I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, trying to force my heart rate down. At 8:58 a.m., the black Maybach pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and Victoria stepped out. She was wearing a simple, elegant white knee-length dress, with a soft pink cardigan draped over her shoulders. Her hair fell freely down her back, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked incredibly soft and approachable today, though that baseline chill in her posture remained. We locked eyes. Morning, I said first. Morning, Victoria nodded. Let's go. The process at the county clerk's office was terrifyingly easy. We filled out the forms, paid the fee, and stood before the clerk. Within 20 minutes, it was done. The clerk pressed the heavy steel embosser into the marriage certificate with a loud clack. Congratulations, you are legally married. I took my copy of the certificate and stared at it. My name and Victoria's name, printed side by side, sealed by the state. It was so real, it made me dizzy. I was married, to a woman I barely knew. Let's go, Victoria said, slipping her copy into her designer tote. We walked out of the building together. The sun was shining brightly, warming the concrete steps. I stood near the doors, squinting up at the blue sky, feeling completely untethered from reality. Tonight, Victoria said, breaking the silence, you're moving into my house. Okay, I nodded. That evening, I stood in front of Victoria's primary residence with a single suitcase. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern mansion in Emerald Hills, an exclusive gated community on the waterfront. I had to crane my neck just to take in the sheer scale of the architecture. The front door swung open, and a warm, 50-something housekeeper beamed at me. You must be Mr. Wright. Ms. Sterling has been waiting for you. Please, come in. I felt my ears burn at being called Mr. Wright in such a formal setting, but I smiled politely and rolled my suitcase into the massive foyer. By 10:30 p.m., we had retreated to the master suite. I stood awkwardly at the foot of the king-size bed. We were legally married, yes, but we were essentially strangers, and now we were supposed to share a bed. Do you prefer the left or the right side? Victoria asked. Her tone was so casual she could have been asking if I wanted water or sparkling. Oh, either is fine. I'll take the right, she said. She walked to the right side of the bed, pulled back the duvet, and slid under the covers. I took a slow, deep breath, walked to the left side, and gingerly laid down. There was easily 2 feet of empty mattress between us. The main lights clicked off, leaving only a small, warm amber lamp glowing on her nightstand. The blackout curtains were cracked just enough to let a sliver of moonlight spill across the hardwood floor. I lay flat on my back, staring at the ceiling. The room was so quiet my heartbeat sounded like a drum in my ears. "Ethan." Victoria's voice broke the darkness. "Yeah? Are you reluctant to be married to me?" I turned my head to look at her. The dim light from the nightstand caught the sharp, beautiful angles of her face. She looked calm, but I could see a faint trace of anxiety hiding in her amber eyes. "No," I smiled softly. "Are you?" She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched so long I almost thought she had fallen asleep. Then she whispered 3 words. "I am very willing." Her voice was so incredibly soft, like a feather brushing against glass. I smiled, opening my mouth to tell her good night. But then I felt it. Beneath the heavy duvet, a hand slowly slid across the sheets and gently wrapped around mine. Her hand was soft, warm, and her fingertips were just slightly cool. She wasn't gripping me tightly, but she held on firmly, like she had caught something she absolutely refused to let go of. My pulse skyrocketed. "Victoria?" My voice came out rough. She didn't answer, but she squeezed my hand tighter. I slowly rolled onto my side to face her. The sliver of moonlight caught the side of her face. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her long eyelashes trembling slightly. A deep flush of red painted her cheeks, and her lips were pressed tightly together, clearly trying to hide how nervous she was. But she didn't let go of my hand. Her palm was pressed flat against mine, our fingers tangled together. "Victoria?" I murmured. This time, she opened her eyes. In the moonlight, her dark eyes were stunning, bright, glassy, and filled with an intoxicating mix of nervousness, anticipation, and an emotion so heavy it felt like it was going to drown me. "Ethan," she whispered. "Yeah? Can you kiss me?" The remaining rational circuits in my brain instantly blew out. I opened my mouth to say something, but my throat locked up. Victoria waited for a few seconds. When I didn't reply, the light in her eyes dimmed. Looking thoroughly crushed, she started to pull her hand away and turn her back to me. That was when my instincts took over. I shifted my weight, rolling over and hovering directly above her. I braced my forearms on either side of her head so I wouldn't crush her. I lowered my head until our foreheads rested against each other, our noses brushing. "Are you sure?" My voice was so husky I barely recognized it. Victoria looked up at me, the moonlight catching the sudden, fierce glow in her eyes. She reached a hand up, her cool fingertips grazing my cheekbone, tracing down the bridge of my nose, and finally brushing against my bottom lip. "I'm sure," she breathed, her voice a breathless sigh. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I dipped my head and kissed her. It started soft, gentle, like I was tasting something fragile and priceless. Her lips were impossibly soft, carrying a faint, cool taste of mint. She kissed me back. But it wasn't just a response. She threw both arms around my neck and pulled me down hard against her. The kiss shattered the gentle prelude, igniting into something desperate, hot, and demanding. It was the kiss of someone who had been suppressing a violent hunger for a very long time. "Do you have any idea?" she whispered against my mouth, her warm breath sending shivers down my spine. "How long I've been waiting for this?" "How long?" "Since the gala." I pulled back just enough to look at her, a laugh escaping my chest. Her hair was a gorgeous, tangled mess against the white pillows. Her cheeks were burning, her lips were swollen, and her eyes were glazed and bright. She looked absolutely nothing like the terrifying CEO who ruled Seattle boardrooms. Right now, she was just a woman, pliant, fiery, and completely uninhibited. "What's so funny?" she demanded, glaring at me with zero actual heat. "The gala was less than a month ago," I teased. I never realized the CEO of Sterling Enterprises was so impatient. The tips of her ears went violently red, but she didn't back down. Instead, she shifted her hips, her knee sliding deliberately up the side of my leg. "Only for you," she said, her eyes burning into mine. "Only you." The moonlight was incredibly bright that night. Victoria's intensity was completely overwhelming. Every trace of the cold, untouchable heiress melted away, replaced by someone utterly obsessed with claiming what was hers. She kissed me with a greedy, frantic urgency, like she was trying to make up for a lifetime of holding back. Hours later, neither of us was asleep. Victoria was curled against my chest, her dark hair spilling over my arm, smelling faintly of jasmine. We just lay there in the quiet dark, tangled together, listening to the steady rhythm of each other's breathing. Married life violently rewrote my daily reality. Moving from a 900-square-foot apartment into a multi-million-dollar waterfront estate was a jarring transition. It took me a full week just to get used to the fact that walking from the bedroom to the kitchen required navigating 3 different hallways. But the biggest shock of all was the staggering difference between Victoria's public persona and who she was behind closed doors. To the rest of the world, she remained the Iron Queen. Cold, calculating, armed with a terrifying intellect and an aura that made grown men sweat in boardrooms. If she spoke in a meeting, the room fell dead silent. Her media interviews were flawless, aggressive masterclasses in corporate dominance. But at home, every morning before she left for the office, she would stand by the front door, stretch up on her tiptoes, and press a quick kiss to my left cheek. It was swift and mechanical, like she was checking off a required daily task on a clipboard. But I always noticed that her ears turned pink afterward, and she'd refuse to make eye contact as she walked out. Every evening when she came home, she'd find me and immediately press a kiss to my right cheek. Sometimes I'd be mid-sentence, and suddenly there was a soft pair of lips on my face. Before dinner? Kiss. While we were reading on the couch? Kiss. Even when I was cooking in the kitchen, she'd wander in, wrap her arms around my waist from behind, and press a kiss to the back of my head, a maneuver that required her to stand on her tiptoes for an uncomfortably long time due to our height difference. It took me less than 2 weeks to transition from being completely flustered and rigid to thoroughly addicted to her constant affection. But the most shocking change happened at her office. Chloe, her assistant, pulled me aside one day when I stopped by the Sterling Tower. She told me Victoria used to be a notorious workaholic. In by 7:30 a.m., out by midnight, and she basically lived in her office on weekends. But since the wedding? Mr. Wright, Victoria leaves work at exactly 5:03 p.m. every single day now, Chloe told me, looking like she was recounting a religious miracle. The second the clock hits 5,003, her laptop shuts and she's out the door. Sometimes she even leaves at 4,000. 4,000? I asked, stunned. Why? Well, Chloe lowered her voice to a whisper. One time I walked into her office to get a signature, and she was staring at the live feed of her home security cameras on her phone. The cameras? Yes. It was a feed of your living room. You were sitting on the couch, reading a book. She watched the screen for about 2 minutes, then told me to cancel her afternoon meetings because she was going home. I stared at Chloe. I suddenly remembered that there was a sleek dome camera mounted in the corner of our living room. It was part of the estate's high-end security grid. I had always thought the angle was weird because it pointed directly at the sectional couch. Now I understood. That wasn't a security camera. That was the Ethan surveillance system. Another time, my firm got slammed with a deadline, and I was stuck at the office until 7:30 p.m. When I finally walked through the front door of the mansion, I found Victoria sitting stiffly on the living room couch. The coffee table was buried under a mountain of financial reports, but she clearly hadn't been reading them. She was staring dead at the front door. The second I walked in, all the tension drained out of her shoulders. "You're home," she said. Her voice was flat, but I could see the massive wave of relief in her eyes. "Yeah, sorry, got caught up with a project." She stood up, walked over to me, and gave me her mandatory cheek kiss. But this time, instead of pulling away, she buried her face into the crook of my neck and took a long, deep breath. "You smell like bad office coffee," she mumbled against my skin. "I drank about 4 cups to survive." "Have you eaten?" "No, I waited to eat with you. Next time you work late, eat at the office. Don't starve yourself waiting for me." "No," I replied instantly. Victoria looked up at me, a tiny smile fighting its way onto her lips. By our 2nd month of marriage, my firm landed a massive city contract, and my workload doubled. I was staying late almost every night, sometimes even burning weekend hours. Victoria hated it. She never threw a tantrum, and she never yelled. Instead, she weaponized a quiet, devastatingly pathetic pout. When I'd put my shoes on in the morning, she'd stand in the hallway, watching me with a look of profound betrayal. When I was stuck at the office past 8:30 p.m., she would text me, Victoria, when are you coming home? Ethan, need another hour. Go to sleep without me. Victoria, no. Waiting for you. And without fail, when I finally unlocked the front door at 10 p.m., she would be curled up on the couch under a cashmere throw blanket, fighting to keep her eyes open, refusing to go upstairs. Why don't you wait for me in bed? I'd ask, feeling a massive pang of guilt as I crouched beside the couch. Because if I lay in bed, I'll fall asleep, she'd say, her logic irrefutable. The couch is uncomfortable, so it keeps me awake. I sighed, pulling her up by the hands. Come on, let's go to bed. She stopped at the bottom of the grand staircase, looking up at me expectantly. You haven't kissed me yet today. I paused, then laughed softly. I leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Better? Insufficient. I kissed her left cheek. How about now? Still lacking. I couldn't hold back my grin. I kissed her right cheek, the tip of her nose, her jawline, and finally brushed my lips against the corner of her mouth. Is that acceptable to the CEO? Her ears burned bright red, but she kept her face completely stoic. It passes inspection. She turned and marched up the stairs, moving noticeably faster than usual. I stood at the bottom of the steps, watching her retreat until she disappeared around the landing, a feeling of overwhelming, absurd happiness settling deep in my chest. It all fell apart on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had taken a half-day off from the firm to run to the downtown shopping district. The Seattle autumn chill had set in early, and I had noticed Victoria shivering on her way to the car lately. She was always too stubborn to dig her winter coats out of storage. I bought a beautiful, light gray cashmere scarf from a boutique. It was incredibly soft, and I knew the color would perfectly complement her skin tone. After paying, I shot her a quick text. Ethan, come home early tonight. I got you a present. I took an Uber back to the house, tossed the shopping bag onto the living room table, and headed into the kitchen to start prepping dinner. I was mincing garlic when my phone started ringing. It was an unknown number. Hello, is this Ethan Wright? This is Seattle General Hospital. Your wife, Victoria Sterling, was involved in a multi-vehicle collision on I-5 at approximately 32 p.m. She is currently in the emergency department. The chef's knife slipped from my fingers, clattering loudly against the granite countertop. I don't remember the Uber ride to the hospital. All I remember is realizing I had sprinted out of the house in my house slippers. I had run 3 blocks in the pouring rain before a cab finally pulled over for me. When I burst through the doors of the ER, I was dripping wet and shaking violently. Victoria Sterling. Where is Victoria Sterling? I practically shouted at the triage desk. A nurse quickly intercepted me. Are you family? Miss Sterling is currently in imaging. Her injuries aren't critical, mostly superficial, but she sustained blunt force trauma to her head. I stood outside the bay doors, drenched, my slippers squeaking on the linoleum floor, staring unblinkingly at the double doors. It felt like hours before the doors finally swung open and an attending physician walked out with a tablet. We've run a full workup, the doctor said. No internal bleeding, no fractures, just some minor lacerations and bruising from the airbag. However, the impact gave her a severe concussion. Based on her cognitive tests, she is experiencing retrograde amnesia. To put it simply, she has temporarily lost some of her memories. My ears started ringing. She is conscious and stable, the doctor continued gently. You can go see her now. I took a shuddering breath and pushed the door to her room open. Victoria was propped up in the hospital bed. A thick white gauze bandage was wrapped around her forehead, and there were angry red scrapes along her jawline. She looked incredibly pale, her lips completely devoid of color. Her eyes were closed. She looked like she was sleeping. I walked over to the bed, my legs feeling like lead, and carefully sat in the plastic chair beside her. I just stared at her face, my chest tight, my eyes stung with hot tears. I reached out and gently picked up the hand she had resting on top of the blanket. Her fingers were freezing. I wrapped both of my hands around hers, holding it tightly, trying to transfer my body heat into her skin. Victoria, I whispered, my voice breaking. Please wake up. I bought you that scarf. It's light gray, cashmere. You're going to love it. She didn't move. I sat there for 20 minutes, just holding her cold hand in the silent room. Finally, a nurse knocked on the door, telling me they needed to run another neurocheck and I had to step out. I slowly lowered her hand back to the bed. I leaned over and pressed a long, soft kiss against her uninjured cheek. I'll be back tomorrow. I whispered near her ear. I walked out of the room, glancing back one last time before the door clicked shut. She was still resting peacefully, though her brow was slightly furrowed, like she was trapped in a bad dream. What I didn't know at the time was that the exact second I turned my back, Victoria's eyelashes had fluttered. She was awake. She had been awake from the moment I grabbed her hand. But she hadn't opened her eyes. Because she didn't recognize my voice. She didn't recognize the warmth of my hands. And she had absolutely no idea who the strange man was who had just kissed her cheek and cried over her bed. A strange man was holding her hand, calling her Victoria, talking about a scarf, and promising to come back tomorrow. Her mind was a complete, terrifying blank. She had no memory of getting married. She didn't remember having a husband. She didn't remember me. So she kept her eyes shut, choosing absolute silence. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, Victoria opened her eyes. She stared at the empty room, her frown deepening into a harsh scowl. "Chloe," she called out, her voice raspy. The door immediately flew open, and her assistant rushed in. "Miss Sterling, you're awake! Am I married?" Victoria demanded, cutting straight to the point. Chloe froze, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Yes, Miss Sterling. You and Ethan Wright have been married for a little over 3 months." Ethan Wright. Victoria tested the name on her tongue. It triggered absolutely nothing. Zero emotional resonance. The man who was just sitting here. "Yes, ma'am. Contact legal and have them draft a divorce settlement immediately," Victoria ordered, her tone as cold and efficient as a steel blade. "If I got married, it was obviously a strategic corporate maneuver. Since I have no memory of it, the asset has lost its utility. There is no reason to maintain a useless marriage. Expedite the paperwork." "Ms. Sterling," Chloe stammered, horrified. "Furthermore," Victoria added, glaring at the door, "do not allow that man back into this room. I don't need visitors." Chloe opened her mouth to argue, but the terrifying look in Victoria's eyes shut her down. "Understood. I'll make the calls." Victoria closed her eyes again. For some infuriating reason, the image of a pair of large, warm hands wrapping around her freezing fingers flashed into her mind. She scowled, violently shoving the memory out of her brain. 2 weeks later. The day of the divorce. The weather was obnoxiously beautiful. The sky was a piercing blue. The sun was bright, and the leaves on the maple trees lining the streets were turning a brilliant, shimmering gold. I stood on the steps of City Hall, wearing a simple white button-down shirt and dark jeans. In my hand, I held the manila folder containing my ID and our marriage certificate. My face was calm, but there were deep, dark circles under my eyes. I hadn't slept properly in 14 days. Since the day of the accident, I hadn't been allowed back into her hospital room. Chloe had called me the next morning, her voice dripping with pity as she relayed the message. "Mr. Wright," Victoria says, "there's no need to visit. She's contacted her lawyers to dissolve the marriage." I hadn't fought it. I knew about her amnesia. I knew she had completely wiped me from her hard drive. It hurt. God, it hurt like hell. But I reminded myself that our marriage was fundamentally a business arrangement anyway. The fact that we had fallen into a comfortable, domestic routine was a fluke. With her memories gone, she had just defaulted back to her factory settings, ruthless, logical, and unattached. I had spent the last 2 weeks staring at the walls of the massive, empty mansion, waiting for updates from Chloe. Before I left the house this morning, I had taken that light gray cashmere scarf and laid it neatly at the foot of her side of the bed. Maybe she'd see it when she finally moved back home. Maybe she'd throw it in the trash. It didn't matter anymore. I checked my Apple Watch. 9:05 a.m. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the black Maybach pulled up to the curb. The door swung open, and Victoria stepped out. The bandages were gone, and the scrapes on her face had faded to faint pink lines. She was dressed in a sharp black blazer and tailored slacks, her hair pulled back into a severe, sleek ponytail. She looked like a corporate assassin. She looked exactly like the woman I had seen across the ballroom 4 months ago. My chest physically ached. Victoria walked toward the steps of City Hall. She glanced up at the building, her eyes sweeping over the architecture, and then her gaze landed on me. She stopped dead in her tracks. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at her. The autumn sun was shining directly behind me, casting a warm halo of light around my shoulders. The breeze ruffled my white shirt. I just stood there, my hands by my side, offering her a faint, resigned smile. From my vantage point, I saw something violently shift in Victoria's expression. Her breath hitched. Her icy, unbothered facade completely shattered for a fraction of a second. Her amber eyes blew wide open, locking onto my face, staring at my eyes, my nose, the curve of my mouth. "Miss Sterling?" Chloe whispered nervously from behind her. Victoria violently snapped out of her trance. She swallowed hard, forced her shoulders back, and marched up the stairs to meet me. "Mr. Wright," she said, her voice stiff. "Vi, Miss Sterling," I corrected myself with a sad smile. "How are you feeling? Are you feeling? Are you fully recovered?" "I am operating at 100%, thank you," she said. Her tone was polite but incredibly distant. "Shall we go inside?" "Yeah." We walked into the lobby. I went to the digital kiosk and printed our queue ticket, B312. There are 3 couples ahead of us. "It'll probably be about 15 minutes, I told her, handing her the slip. Victoria nodded once and walked over to an empty corner of the waiting area. I followed, leaning against the wall about 3 feet away from her. For the next 15 minutes, silence stretched between us. But out of the corner of my eye, I could feel her staring at me. Every time I looked out the window, every time I shifted my weight, every time I breathed, I could feel the weight of her gaze dragging over my profile. I didn't understand it. She was looking at me like she was trying to solve a terrifyingly complex math equation. "Number B312, please proceed to Windows 7. The automated voice echoed through the lobby. I looked down at the ticket, then looked at her. "That's us." We walked up to the bulletproof glass of Windows 7. A middle-aged clerk with heavily drawn-on eyebrows looked up from her stack of files. "Filing for dissolution of marriage?" the clerk asked, looking between the two of us. "IDs and marriage certificate, please." I slid my documents under the glass. Victoria pulled hers from her designer bag and did the same. The clerk typed our info into the computer, glancing back and forth between our faces. "You two are a gorgeous couple. It's a shame. Why are you getting divorced?" I didn't say anything. Victoria didn't either. "Right, none of my business," the clerk muttered, sliding 2 heavy packets of paper under the glass. "Sign at the bottom of all 3 pages." I picked up the pen chained to the counter. I stared at the line labeled Petitioner Signature. My hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but I pressed the ballpoint to the paper and slowly signed my name. Victoria picked up the second pen. She looked down at her packet. She placed the tip of the pen on the paper, and then she froze. She didn't move. She slowly turned her head and looked at me. She stared at my hand, watching my fingers tremble slightly as I capped my pen. I saw her swallow hard. Suddenly, she dropped the pen. It clattered loudly against the counter. "Wait," Victoria blurted out. The clerk looked up. "Is there a problem?" I forgot my ID," Victoria said, her face completely deadpan. The clerk stared at her, then slowly pointed a manicured finger at the desk. "Ma'am, your ID is literally sitting right here. I just scanned it." I looked down. Her Washington State driver's license was sitting exactly where she had placed it 2 minutes ago. The air in the room completely stalled. "Oh, is it?" Victoria didn't even blink. "My mistake. I meant, I forgot my birth certificate." "Your birth certificate is under your ID," the clerk said, her tone dripping with exhaustion. Victoria took a sharp breath, her flawless posture rigid with panic. "I must have brought the wrong copies," she lied through her teeth. "Regardless, we cannot proceed today. We will reschedule." Before I or the clerk could say a single word, Victoria snatched her documents off the counter, shoved them into her bag, spun on her heel, and practically bolted for the exit. "Victoria?" I called after her, stunned. She didn't look back. She pushed through the revolving doors and vanished into her Maybach, the car peeling away from the curb before I had even stepped outside. The divorce was left hanging in purgatory. I texted Chloe a few days later, asking when we were rescheduling the appointment. Chloe texted back, "Miss Sterling's schedule is currently fully booked. She will advise when she has an opening." A week passed, then 2. I finally lost patience and texted Victoria directly. "Ethan, Miss Sterling, when are you free to finalize the paperwork at City Hall?" I stared at my phone for 2 straight hours before she finally replied. "Victoria, busy with Q3 reports. We will discuss later." I stared at the 4 words. Busy? It took 20 minutes to sign a piece of paper. You couldn't spare 20 minutes? And then, the bizarre invitations started. On a Wednesday evening, Chloe called me. "Mr. Wright, Victoria would like to meet with you to discuss the division of assets. Are you free for dinner tomorrow night? I frowned. The prenup and divorce agreement had already been finalized by her lawyers. She was being incredibly generous, giving me a payout that dwarfed my dad's entire company net worth. What was left to discuss? But I agreed anyway. The next night, I walked into the private dining room of a high-end restaurant. Victoria was already sitting there. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored sweater. Her hair was down. It was the exact same outfit she had worn on our first date with our fathers. When I walked in, her eyes locked onto me for a full second before darting away. "Sit," she ordered. The waiters brought the food. Grilled salmon, braised short ribs, garlic asparagus, and tomato basil bisque. My heart did a violent flip. These were my favorites. The exact meal she always ordered for us. But she shouldn't remember this. "Why did you order this?" I asked, testing the waters. "It was the chef's recommendation," Victoria lied smoothly. "Is it not to your liking?" "No, I love it." For the next hour, Victoria subjected me to the most absurd negotiation I had ever experienced. She kept pulling out revised divorce settlements, and every single one offered me exponentially more money. "Victoria, the original agreement is fine. You don't need to give me 50,000 shares of your tech subsidiary. I feel it is an inequitable distribution," she interrupted, taking a sip of wine. "The new terms stand." Okay. We ate in silence and went our separate ways. I went home feeling completely bewildered. 3 days later, Chloe called again. "Mr. Wright, Victoria has identified some discrepancies in the asset division. She requests another dinner meeting this Friday. Never want. Never want. Never same restaurant. Never same room. Same food." This time, she slid a paper across the table offering me the deed to the Emerald Hills mansion. "Victoria," I said, putting my fork down and looking her dead in the eye. "What exactly are you trying to do?" She didn't answer. She took a slow bite of asparagus. She looked completely poised, but I noticed her knuckles were white from gripping her fork so tightly. "Nothing. I just prefer clean ledgers. Our ledgers are spotless." "I disagree." Another 3 days passed. Chloe called me again. "Mr. Wright," Victoria says. "Let me guess. We need to discuss asset division over dinner." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Yes. What assets are left?" "She's already tried to give me her house, her cars, and half her stock portfolio." She wants to discuss the transfer of her international vacation properties, sir." I sat on my cheap apartment couch, staring at the wall in stunned silence. "Chloe," I said softly, "level with me. What is she actually doing?" The line was quiet for a long, heavy moment. "Mr. Wright," Chloe finally whispered, "I think you need to ask her that yourself." I took a deep breath. I was done playing this game. "Fine. Tell her I'll come to the mansion tomorrow night. But we aren't talking about real estate. I'm going to ask her a question, and she's going to answer it." The next evening, I pulled into the driveway of the Emerald Hills estate. I rang the doorbell. It swung open, revealing Victoria. She was wearing oversized silk pajamas, her hair tied in a messy bun. When she saw me, her breath caught slightly in her throat. "Come in." I stepped into the living room. It looked exactly the same as the day I left. But then my eyes landed on the coffee table. Sitting right in the center of the glass was the light gray cashmere scarf. I had left it at the foot of the bed upstairs. She had clearly brought it down here. Victoria followed my gaze. Her ears instantly turned a violent shade of crimson. "That scarf," she started, her voice defensive. "Did you buy that?" "Yeah. I bought it the afternoon of your crash. It was supposed to be a surprise gift, but obviously I never got to give it to you." She went quiet. She stared at the scarf for a long time before whispering, "It's very soft. It's really warm." I turned to face her, crossing my arms. "Victoria, cut the crap. What are you doing? You've dragged me out to dinner 3 times to offer me increasingly psychotic amounts of money. You aren't negotiating a divorce." She didn't speak. "You don't want to get divorced, do you?" Her entire body flinched. Slowly, she lifted her head to look at me, and in that moment, the iron armor completely cracked. Her dark amber eyes were swimming with an emotion so thick and vulnerable it knocked the breath out of my lungs. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't." My heart hammered against my ribs like a jackhammer. "Why?" She looked down at the floor, her fingers anxiously twisting the hem of her silk shirt. "I don't remember you," she confessed, her voice cracking. "I don't remember meeting you. I don't remember our wedding. I don't remember living in this house with you." She looked back up, a tear finally breaking loose and sliding down her cheek. "But that day at City Hall, when I stepped out of the car and looked up at the stairs and saw you standing there, my heart recognized you. I stopped breathing. I looked at you standing in the sunlight," she choked out, "and my brain told me you were a stranger. But my body was screaming that you were the person I loved most in the world. I was instantly drawn to you." The back of my eyes burned. "I know it sounds insane," she cried, scrubbing the tear away. "I have amnesia. I should want a clean break. But I couldn't sign that paper. The thought of walking away from you made me feel like I was suffocating. I don't know why, but I know I belong with you." She placed a trembling hand over her own chest. "Right here. It knows exactly who you are." I stood glued to the floor, completely incapable of formulating a word. Victoria took a step closer, tilting her head back to look at me, her eyes desperate. "I'm sorry. I changed my mind. I don't want a divorce. I know I don't have my memories, but the second I saw you, I understood exactly why I married you." I swallowed the massive lump in my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why?" I asked hoarsely. "I don't know," Victoria answered honestly. "But I've been thinking about it constantly, trying to figure out how we ended up married. I assumed it was a corporate alliance. But the more I looked at Sterling Enterprises' financials—" She paused, a deep, perplexed furrow forming between her brows. She suddenly looked like a CEO analyzing a flawed business model. "With my market share and capital leverage, why on earth would I need a strategic alliance with a mid-market contractor?" Hearing her say it out loud made her freeze. Her expression morphed from sad to confused to horrified. She tilted her head, clearly running the timeline of events through her hyper-analytical brain. "So, if it wasn't a corporate alliance, why did I marry you?" she muttered to herself, her eyes darting across my face. "I met you at a gala. I ran a background check on you. I orchestrated a dinner with her fathers. I offered a fake business proposition to secure a marriage certificate." Her words slowed down. Her jaw slowly dropped open. The sheer, unadulterated shock on her face was almost comical. "Oh my God," she breathed, her eyes wide with horror. Did I trap you into marrying me?" I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper to keep from bursting into laughter. I maintained a perfectly stoic face. "Keep going. I lied to you about a corporate merger because I wanted you? And? And? And I completely bypassed dating and just legally abducted you." She stared at me, her face flushed with the most profound, soul-crushing embarrassment I had ever witnessed. She slowly raised both hands and covered her face. "Oh my God!" she groaned into her palms, her voice muffled and dripping with utter humiliation. "I thought I was the victim of a business deal. I tried to divorce you because I thought I was being cold and rational, but I was the predator. I couldn't hold it in anymore." I threw my head back and laughed. "Don't laugh at me," Victoria snapped, peeking through her fingers, her face burning. You knew I scammed you. Why didn't you say anything?" I almost laughed again, but I gave her a solemn nod. "How was I supposed to know?" I shot back, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "I was the victim of a billionaire's fake marriage scheme." Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, and realized I was completely right. She dropped her hands. Her face was so red it rivaled a stop sign. The ruthless, terrifying CEO of Sterling Enterprises was standing in her living room looking like a teenager who had just been caught reading her own diary out loud. "So," she mumbled, refusing to look me in the eye, "you actually believed it was a corporate alliance?" "Yeah," I nodded. "You lied very convincingly. I trusted you." "Then, why did you agree to the divorce?" "Because you didn't remember me," I said gently, the humor fading. "You looked at me like I was a stranger. Why would I force you to stay with me? Besides, you offered me enough hush money to buy a small island. I figured I should take the hint." Victoria's expression twisted in misery. She stared at my chest for a long time, looking like she wanted to punch me and hug me at the same time. "You give up too easily," she accused. "Excuse me? You didn't even try to fight for me. You wiped me from your brain and sent your lawyer after me. What was I supposed to do?" You could have, Victoria stammered, completely failing to find a valid argument. "Because it was her fault. She was the one who ordered Chloe to draw up the papers. She took a deep, frustrated breath, composing herself. Fine. I admit fault for my previous actions. But what about right now? What about right now? I am stating, for the record, that I am rescinding the divorce. What is your response? I looked at her, crossing my arms and deliberately letting the silence stretch out. I'll have to consider it, I said slowly. Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Consider what? You completely broke my heart by demanding a divorce. Now you want to snap your fingers and have me back? I have my pride, Victoria. She took a deep, calming breath, clearly trying to prevent herself from committing a felony. Ethan Wright. Yes? Are you leveraging this situation to extort me? No, I smiled innocently. I just think you need to demonstrate some actual sincerity. Sincerity. Define your terms. For example, I tapped my chin thoughtfully. You could actually try courting me. Victoria froze. Excuse me? Court me, I grinned. Date me. Woo me. You skipped that entire step when you tricked me into marrying you. Now is the perfect time to make up for it. Victoria stared at me in absolute silence for a solid minute. Finally, she ground her jaw, a terrifyingly competitive glint flashing in her amber eyes. All fine. I almost laughed again, but I gave her a solemn nod. Great. You can start tomorrow. It's getting late, so I'm going to head back to my apartment. I turned and started walking toward the front door. Wait, Victoria yelled, jogging after me. You're leaving? Why don't you just stay here? Absolutely not, I said without looking back, grabbing the doorknob. You're my pursuer now. A pursuer doesn't sleep in the same house as their target. It violates the rules of the game. What rules? Who wrote these rules? I did. I stepped out into the cool night air and pulled the door shut behind me, leaving Victoria standing in her massive foyer, absolutely vibrating with indignation. As I walked to my Uber, I couldn't stop smiling. Inside the house, Victoria pulled her phone out and furiously typed a message. Victoria, Chloe, how do you court a man? Chloe, Ms. Sterling, what exactly do you mean by court? Victoria, romantically. Ethan demanded that I court him. Chloe, was your phone stolen? Should I cancel your credit cards? Victoria, it's me. Answer the question. Chloe, honestly, Ms. Sterling, you don't need my advice. You were terrifyingly efficient at it before. Chloe, background checks, manipulating his family, orchestrating a fake corporate merger. Just replicate that operational strategy. Victoria glared at her screen. Victoria, give me something socially acceptable. Chloe? Well, send flowers, book nice dinners, pick him up from work, ask him if he's eaten. Victoria, that's it? Chloe, that's standard dating procedure, ma'am. But it requires genuine effort. You can't just throw money at him. Victoria tossed her phone onto the couch and stared up at the vaulted ceiling. Courting. She had never courted anyone in her entire life. Men threw themselves at her feet, and her only job was stepping over them. Now she had to court a junior architect who also happened to be her legally wedded husband. She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing. Fine. Challenge accepted. He belonged to her anyway. It was just a matter of time before she reeled him back in. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. I groaned, blindly swiping at my nightstand until I answered it. Get up. The voice was cold, crisp, and undeniably Victoria. Pow. What time is it? 7. You need to consume breakfast. I stared blindly at the ceiling for 3 seconds. Did you call me just to serve as my alarm clock? Correct. You didn't use an alarm clock before. You used to just lean over and kiss my cheek until I woke up. The line went completely dead silent. Then, a sharp click. She hung up on me. I pulled the phone away from my ear, laughing out loud. I rolled over, intending to grab another 10 minutes of sleep when the doorbell rang. I dragged myself out of bed, shuffled to the door in my sweatpants, and opened it. A man in a sharp black chauffeur uniform was standing there, holding a heated thermal bag. Good morning, Mr. Wright. Miss Sterling ordered me to deliver your breakfast. I took the bag and opened it on my kitchen counter. Steel-cut oatmeal with fresh berries, avocado toast, scrambled eggs, and a fruit bowl. Resting on top of the containers was a heavy, expensive cardstock note. Written in sharp, aggressive cursive were the words, "Eat your breakfast. Do not starve yourself. V. Sterling." I stared at the note, my chest feeling impossibly warm. I snapped a picture of the food and texted it to her. Ethan, received. Thank you, Miss Sterling. Ethan, you're seriously responding with corporate speak? When I walked out of my office building at 5:30 p.m., a black Maybach was illegally parked directly in front of the main doors. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Victoria in her dark sunglasses. Get in. What are you doing here? I am picking you up from your place of employment. Don't you have a driver for this? I am operating the vehicle today, she said, her face an unreadable mask. Get in. I am taking you to dinner. I bit my lip to hide my grin, opened the passenger door, and slid in. The atmosphere in the car was incredibly tense. Victoria had both hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Her spine was locked straight, her eyes fixed on the road. She looked like driving a bomb through a minefield. You don't need to be this stressed out, I offered. I am not experiencing stress. Your hands are shaking. The cabin temperature is suboptimal. Victoria, it's 80 degrees outside. She didn't speak for 2 seconds, then aggressively jabbed the climate control button, blasting the AC. It is cold now. I rested my head against the window, laughing quietly. Okay, if you say so. She drove us to Canlis, the most exclusive fine dining restaurant in Seattle. When we handed our keys to the valet, I looked at her in surprise. How did you get a reservation here? They book out 6 months in advance. I did yesterday. How? I bought the building, she said without breaking stride. I stopped walking. Oh, she turned around. Is there an issue? No, it's just your method of courtship is aggressively capitalistic. Her ears turned pink. Are you going to eat or not? I'm eating. Throughout the entire multi-course tasting menu, Victoria barely touched her food. Instead, she covertly watched my every move. She noted which dishes I finished, which ones I pushed around, and when I frowned at a particularly weird foam reduction. She was gathering data. When the dessert plates were cleared, I set my napkin down and looked at her. Victoria. Yes? You don't need to buy a landmark restaurant to feed me. When you took me out to dinner before, we went to a quiet place and you ordered 4 simple dishes: salmon, short ribs, asparagus, and tomato soup. I loved it. She blinked, genuinely surprised. You remember that? Of course I remember. You ordered it every single time we ate out. I was honestly getting a little sick of salmon. But you just said you loved it. I loved that you remembered my favorites, I corrected softly. I didn't care about the food. Victoria stared at me, the pink flush from her ears rapidly spreading across her cheeks. Noted, she murmured, looking down at her water glass. The next day at the office, a delivery guy walked in carrying an absurdly massive floral arrangement. It was a giant bouquet of deep blue hydrangeas, accented with white baby's breath, wrapped in expensive matte paper. The delivery guy dropped it on my desk, and my coworkers immediately swarmed my cubicle. Holy crap, Ethan, my coworker gasped. Who sent those? Blue hydrangeas are ridiculously expensive. I pulled the small envelope from the center of the flowers and opened it. A wife is legally permitted to buy her husband flowers. V. Sterling. I stared at the heavy ink strokes, a massive, unstoppable grin breaking across my face. My wife sent them, I said. My coworker's jaw dropped. You're married? Yeah. And your wife sends you flowers? Yeah, she does. My coworker gave me a look that was a potent mix of awe and deep confusion. It wasn't exactly standard procedure for the wife to send the husband the "I'm sorry I love you" apology bouquet. I took a picture of the flowers and sent it to her. Ethan, received. They're beautiful. Victoria, when are you moving back into my house? Ethan, that is a separate negotiation. I put my phone down, staring at the blue petals. I realized, with a terrifying amount of clarity, that being ruthlessly pursued by a billionaire CEO was extremely flattering. But the climax of her courtship happened the very next day. I walked out of my office building at 5:30 p.m., surrounded by my coworkers, and immediately froze in my tracks. Standing in the middle of the crowded downtown plaza, surrounded by hundreds of commuters, was Victoria Sterling. She was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal pantsuit, and she was holding a massive piece of white poster board over her head. Written on the board in thick, black Sharpie were the words, "Ethan Wright, I am courting you." People were stopping on the sidewalk, whispers were breaking out. Cell phones were being raised to record the CEO of Sterling Enterprises holding a glitter-free fan sign like a deranged concert groupie. My face instantly caught fire. I sprinted across the plaza, grabbed the poster board out of her hands, and shoved it under my arm. "What are you doing?" I hissed, my face burning. "I am courting you," she said, her face a mask of absolute, unshakable dignity. "You demanded sincerity." My analysts concluded that grand public declarations demonstrate the highest level of romantic commitment. You're the head of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate," I sputtered, looking at the growing crowd. "Aren't you afraid this is going to be on Twitter in 5 minutes?" "I welcome the publicity," she said coldly. "It establishes a public barrier to entry. Once the market knows I am pursuing you, hostile competitors will back down." I stared at her, utterly defeated. I had a terrifying realization. If I forced her to keep courting me, she was going to escalate until she rented a blimp to fly over Seattle. I was going to break before she did. When I finally escaped to my apartment that night, there was a massive cardboard box sitting in front of my door. I dragged it inside and cut the tape. Inside the box were neatly folded, individually wrapped scarves, 7 of them, ranging from light gray to charcoal, in cashmere, silk, and heavy wool. Sitting on top was a note. "I didn't know which texture you preferred, so I acquired the inventory. V. Sterling." I crouched on the floor at my cheap apartment, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of winter wear, and pulled out my phone. I hit her contact and held the phone to my ear. She picked up on the first ring. "Ethan." "Victoria, why did you buy me 7 scarves? I deemed it necessary." Her voice dropped an octave, growing incredibly quiet. "The gray scarf you bought me, I sleep holding it every night." My breath hitched in my throat. "What did you say?" "Disregard that," she said quickly, her corporate armor slamming back into place. "When are you returning to the estate?" I closed my eyes, a long, shaky breath escaping my lungs. I was done fighting it. "Tomorrow." The line went dead silent for a full 2 seconds. "Confirm that statement," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's confirmed. I'm coming home tomorrow." "Okay." It was only one word, but I could hear the devastating, radiant smile hiding behind it. The next evening, I dragged my suitcase up the stone steps of the Emerald Hills mansion. I reached for the doorbell, but before my finger even brushed the plastic, the heavy oak doors flew open. She had clearly been standing in the foyer, watching the security cameras, waiting for me. Victoria stood in the doorway. She was wearing one of my old white t-shirts, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She was trying desperately to keep her face neutral, but the blinding light in her amber eyes gave her away completely. "You're back," she breathed. "I'm back." She stepped aside to let me in. As I rolled my suitcase past her, she suddenly reached out and grabbed the sleeve of my jacket, her grip tight. "Ethan." "Yeah? I won't ever forget you again." I stopped and turned to look at her. "Even if I lose my memory 100 times, I will always find my way back to you," she said, her voice fierce and completely devoid of corporate logic. "Because my heart recognizes you, and it is infinitely more reliable than my brain." My eyes flooded with heat. I let go of the suitcase handle, stepped into her space, and wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her flush against me. "Victoria," I murmured into her hair. "Yes? You don't have to court me anymore." "Why? Have I met the required metrics?" "Because," I smiled, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head, "you won a long time ago." She buried her face into my chest, inhaling deeply. "Then why did you make me do all of that?" "I just wanted to see what it looked like when the Iron Queen of the Pacific Northwest tried to flirt." "And your assessment?" "You're terrible at it," I laughed softly. "But it was incredibly cute." She raised a fist and lightly punched my chest. "You are insufferable." I just laughed harder, pulling her tighter against me. That night, the moonlight spilled through the cracks in the blackout curtains, illuminating the massive king-sized bed. Victoria was curled against my chest, her fingers idly tracing abstract patterns over my collarbone. "Ethan." "I need to ask you a question." "Shoot." "Did you honestly, truly believe we were getting married for a corporate alliance?" "Yeah, I did." "You never once suspected I was lying?" "I suspected it was weird, but I figured, given your status, you had absolutely no reason to lie to a guy like me. So I bought it." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "And how do you feel now, knowing that it wasn't business? Knowing that I fell in love with you at first sight and manipulated you into marrying me?" I looked down at her. The moonlight caught her eyes, turning them into pools of liquid gold. "I feel like the luckiest guy on earth," I said honestly. Why? Because you have the power to choose anything or anyone in the world, and you chose me. Victoria looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Ethan. Yeah? Do you know why I targeted you? Why? Because at that gala, every single man in the room was staring at me. Everyone was trying to figure out how to approach me, how to use me, except you. You were standing in the darkest corner of the room, looking at your phone, completely ignoring me. I blinked. Wow, so the billionaire romance novels are actually accurate. You guys really do fall for the one person who ignores you. For the record, I wasn't ignoring you. I looked at you when you walked in. But you didn't swarm me, she countered. You just stood there, quiet, grounded, and completely at peace. You weren't intimidated, and you weren't greedy. She paused, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw. And then you looked at me, and I looked at you. Your eyes were so warm, and in that exact second, I made an executive decision. Her voice dropped to a fierce whisper. I decided I wanted you, and I decided I was going to have you. I stared down at her, the heat behind my eyes spilling over into a single tear. I lowered my head and pressed my lips to her forehead. I'm yours, I whispered. I'm all yours. Victoria smiled. It was the sweetest, warmest, most un-CEO-like smile I had ever seen. She looked like a normal girl, completely and helplessly in love. She pushed up on her elbows and pressed a soft kiss to my lips. Ethan. Yeah? I love you. I know. You are required to say it back. I love you. Repeat it. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. Victoria buried her face against my chest, her shoulders shaking with quiet, muffled laughter. It was a beautiful sound, like wind chimes caught in a summer breeze. Epilogue. 3 months later. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I was standing in the kitchen, flipping eggs in a frying pan, listening to the coffee maker hiss. I heard soft footsteps padding against the hardwood floor. A moment later, 2 arms wrapped around my waist from behind, and Victoria pressed her face into my back. She was wearing one of my oversized dress shirts, her hair a sleep tousled mess. Morning, she mumbled against my spine. Morning, I smiled, expertly flipping an egg. You're up early. I had a dream. About what? She went quiet for a few seconds, just holding me tighter. I dreamed about the first time we spoke. My hand froze on the spatula. It was in a ballroom, her voice was soft, echoing in the quiet kitchen. You were standing in the corner, wearing a navy suit, holding a glass of champagne. You looked like you didn't belong there. She paused, and I could feel her smiling against my back. And then I walked up to you, and I said one sentence. I reached over and killed the burner. I turned around, leaning against the counter, and looked down at her. What did you say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria looked up at me. Her amber eyes were completely clear, completely present, reflecting the morning light pouring in through the kitchen windows. I told you that you have beautiful eyes. My throat locked up. A hot tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. You remember? She nodded, her own eyes brimming with tears. I remember everything, she whispered. I remember you cooking for me. I remember you reading on the couch. I remember falling asleep waiting for you to come home. I remember the sound of your voice, and I remember exactly how it feels when you kiss my cheek. She reached up and cupped my face in her hands. Ethan Wright. Do you want to know a verified fact? What? She smiled, and the whole world seemed to quiet down just to let her speak. No matter how many times my brain breaks, the second I look at you, my heart will force me to fall in love with you all over again. I let out a wet, breathless laugh, pulling her hands down and pressing them to my chest. You, I choked out, half laughing, half crying, are being entirely too cheesy for a corporate shark. It's not cheesy, she said, going up on her tiptoes to kiss my mouth. It's empirical data. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her completely off the floor and burying my face in her neck. Victoria. Yes? You are never allowed to get in a car crash again. Agreed. You are never allowed to forget me again. Understood. And you are never, ever allowed to threaten me with a divorce again. Noted. You're not even going to argue? I smiled against her skin. There's no point, she laughed, the sound vibrating against my chest. Even if I forget you 1,000 times, I'll just end up hunting you down and forcing you to marry me again. You can't escape me. I threw my head back and laughed. I kissed the top of her head, holding her as tightly as I could. Good. The morning sun spilled across the kitchen island, washing the room in gold. The eggs in the pan were getting cold, but neither of us cared. We just stood there, holding on to each other, perfectly content to stay exactly where we were. End.